Hello, everyone. Not the proper answer. Hello, everyone. Hello. There we go. Thanks for spending some time indoors on this lovely Austin day. Thanks for coming to this event. We've got a full day of programming here. We're actually on our back half. So we've got a panel now. We've got a panel at 4 p.m. on how data will save media. I'll be moderating that with some great panelists. I want to, found my clicker, thank our sponsors, Amagi and VideoAmp, both of whom have spent a tremendous amount of effort on with us making this into a great day of programming, both of whom are revolutionizing the media world. Amagi revolutionizing the back end of video play everywhere on the planet Earth. VideoAmp revolutionizing the way we measure and count impressions here in the United States. This panel is one that I've really looked forward to. We've got a great slate of panelists. I want to introduce our moderator, who will introduce all of our panelists. So let me please bring to the stage Erica Allen, Head of Audience Strategy and Growth for the Washington Post. Big round of applause. Whichever you want. Thanks. Good luck. Come on up.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Evan. I'm Erica Allen. Oh, I'll get up here. All right. Thank you all for joining us. I do think this is going to be a really, really great conversation. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. I'm Erica Allen. This is the way we're going to build trust with our audience here, right? We're going to say who we are, what we do, what perspective we're coming at this from. So I'm Erica Allen. I'm Head of Audience Strategy and Growth at the Washington Post. I am thinking, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm thinking daily about the ways that we can build community, build trust, get people to think about, the information, the journalism that we're delivering on a daily basis critically, but also to sort of understand where we're coming from and have that connection to the Post. And each of these panelists here are going to talk about their perspective on media and audience trust from the background that they're coming from. So I'll let everyone sort of say a bit about themselves. Mickey?
I'm Mickey, and I'm not wearing as cool boots as Erica is, and I'm really sad about that. I had this opportunity yesterday to buy boots here, and I didn't. I should have. Thank you for having me. I work for a company called GWI, and where I come from, where the work that I do is all around consumers. So we measure consumer thoughts and feelings about everything in the US, but also in 54 markets around the world. So everything from demographics, so we know who they are, what they're consuming in terms of media, how much they're consuming, and also attitudinally, also brands, what they're consuming and buying, but also attitudes. So how are they feeling about things going on in the world? How do they see themselves? And all of that data is amassed, and our clients buy it so that they can understand their consumers and their competitors' consumers. So really, I come at this conversation from the consumer side. What are the consumers saying about the topics that we're going to speak about today?
My name is Veera, and I come to this discussion from the point of view of responsible AI. I'm from a company called Saidot, and we have a leading platform for AI governance, helping companies and public organizations in getting the value out of AI in responsible manner. But I also come from a Nordic country, with Finland, with the highest trust in news in the whole world, and I have a background also in the media industry. Worked there for 8 years, just some time ago. So this topic is really for me a kind of combination of my history and current state and future, and yeah, looking forward to this interesting discussion with you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Paul Chun. I'm the strategic advisor for Hacks and Hackers, which is a global nonprofit that's been around for 15 years, where we bring together the hacks, journalists like myself, and hackers, the technologists, to reimagine what the future of media look like. And in the next couple of years, what we want to look at is what constitutes a healthy information ecosystem in the context of Web3 and AI. Prior to that, I've been a veteran journalist for everywhere from the Associated Press to NBC News to the Miami Herald to Center for Public Integrity, the Wall Street Journal, and then I also had a brief stint at the Knight Foundation, which funded a lot of journalism and technology, as well as research. So I'm one of these really tired journalism practitioners that really want to transform journalism.
All right, well, why don't we start the conversation talking a little bit about the importance of trust, right? I think that, you know, the decline in trust in media is not new. It didn't start happening this year. It didn't start happening once AI started dominating the conversation in the way that it has in the past year. So I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you about what the importance of trust from your perspective is, and then also why, you know, what your hypothesis or observation or experience of why trust has been declining in media and in brands for some time now. Mickey, do you want to kick us off since you really represent the consumer here?
Sure, happy to kick you off, or kick us off, not kick you off. That would be weird. So from the consumer perspective, as I mentioned, we run a lot of surveys around the world. And we've been looking a lot at media and also trust, especially because of the political environment that we're in right now, and with the elections, especially in the US, heating up in the United States. So we have seen from the consumer perspective some trends actually over the last few years. We ran a study in November of last year, so just a few months ago, and found that that when we're looking at people who consume political news, people who are interested in political news and who've consumed it in the last month, that they sort of are going to different places to access information. And we also looked at it by generations, so younger folks versus older folks. And I'm in the older folks group, by the way, in case so I can say that word. From the younger folks' perspective, so Gen Z and millennials are really looking at social media. Maybe not a huge surprise for a lot of the information that they're accessing. Younger folks like Gen Z are will go to social media, but will also go to friends and family. So they tend to go to people that they know. On the other hand, older folks are looking at national news in the US as their primary source, the source that they go to the most often. And beyond that, also news websites. So those are the sources that they're going to. Interestingly, boomers, the older age group that we looked at, are still really the ones using newspapers. So that really didn't pop for any other age cohort, but for the boomers. So different folks are going to different sources for information. That's one thing. In the same study, we also included not just the US, but 10 other markets, representing some markets in Europe, in Latin America, and also in Asia. And we asked them what is the most trustworthy news source, so to bring in that piece of trust. And what we found was there were a lot of similarities, national news across the board, when you look across all 10 markets and adding in the 11th, which is the US, comparing the US to the other 10. National news popped to the top as the most trustworthy across all of these markets. Then there were some differences that we noticed as well, and I'm actually going to refer to my numbers because I only found that this morning, so it didn't stick in my head. But news websites also about the same. When we come to social media, things start to look a little bit different. So when you look at social media, the rest of the world, non-US, tends to find social media more trustworthy than the US. And the other important and I think interesting stat that we found was that of all those 11 markets, including the US is the country where there is the least amount of trust. So across all of those sources, the US, or respondents from the US or people in the US didn't pick any of them. So they don't really pick any of those as most trustworthy, a lot more than outside of the United States. So we see some varying trends when you look at US versus the rest of the world. From a personal perspective, oh, and one other stat that just popped into my head that I thought was interesting was that since 2020 in the US, the amount of trust that Americans have for news has gone down by about 25%. So it's gone down quite a bit. And if you think about it, what's been going on since then? COVID, and a lot of other crazy things. I promised myself I won't get too much into politics, but a lot of other crazy things that has developed and increased and accelerated the mistrust that I think that Americans have for media in general.
Paul, what do you think some of the key factors that influence audience trust are, right? Particularly from the news and journalism and media perspective.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the feedback loop. What is the relationship between media and you? And I would say in mainstream journalism, we are basically terrible, terrible partners. We ask you out for your first date and we expect you to marry us with a subscription without even taking you to a second date or asking you what you like, right? So I think part of this is, in America in particularly, right, when you see a lot of the distrust is really brief from we no longer have a feedback loop or relationship with communities. We are still operating from the mindset that we're here to mass communicate when that is not the technological trend and that's not what people expect. So I think that's one major factor because we don't spend time in building relationship. Trust is inherently habitual as well as personal, right? You trust your trainer for a reason. Hopefully you trust your parents for a reason, right? Because, you know, and that's why in Mickey's research, people trust newspaper because it's something that they do every morning. They do every morning, a newspaper get passed around, right? Like the UI is like you read it, you pass it on to someone, you might leave it at a bus station, you might leave it at other locations that other pick up, right? So that habit is there, but digital disrupt all of these habits. So when you think about what is your relationship with news and what is that habit and what does that feedback loop look like is what caused a lot of the distrust that we see today.
And so when we think about feedback loops and habits and sort of the places where people have gravitated to get their information, right? I mean, social media, I would say, is another thing that really, you know, before COVID, before all of the other things that happened, changed the dynamics of the way that we engage with information. And that is AI. That's like old AI. We don't even talk about that kind of AI anymore, right? Algorithmic, artificial intelligence. Vera, will you talk a little bit about like this sort of added layer that's come in more recently that has, I think, shifted the dynamic between audiences and information in generative AI and the conversation that I think has become even more complex most recently?
Yeah, sure. So totally agree. The kind of the algorithms changed our lives already years ago with Cambridge Analytica scandals, for example, affecting elections in Europe and elsewhere. But what's happening now with generative AI is that it's becoming so easy to generate high quality seeming content that is totally fake, and so with deep fake videos of famous people that seem so real that it's so difficult. That is getting very difficult for us to understand what is real and what is not. And then that's even taken into a personalized level where we're attacking kind of personal weaknesses and kind of weak points of how to manipulate people, and that's all possible to be done on a kind of individual level and affect how we think and work and operate. So this kind of like I see that there are huge risks with. Especially with deepfake content and with deeply kind of personalized manipulative content that can be created with AI, and that can that can be then applied to huge masses of people, and then further polarize us to be kind of put against each other. That has been going on already with these AI algorithms earlier, but in that case it was much more like the content was much more difficult to create, and it was not tailored for everyone specifically. But yeah, it will just get worse, I'm afraid, with all of this. And of course, another thing that is happening is that it's just so easy to generate quite good-looking and kind of content that seems to be of kind of high quality, but it's not. That the internet will probably be mostly made by AI in the future, so it will not take long before a majority of the content online will be made by AI, and the amount will just be so big that it will be difficult also for us to navigate in all that kind of content generated with AI, and it will also make it more difficult for news outlets and other kind of media industry players to stand out in the middle of all that kind of mediocre AI-generated content.
Can I add to that? I think we have some examples. On a daily basis, we start to see these kinds of examples pop up, and I think it ends up eroding trust even further. So recently, with the primaries going on in the United States, I think it was in, I don't know if it was Vermont or New Hampshire, I forgot. New Hampshire, thank you very much. There were calls made to folks that were generated. I think that, Biden is calling you and saying something.
Yeah, don't vote for me.
So, yeah. Which should have been the first sort of hint that maybe it was not real, but you see this happening in very important parts of our lives that can have real big impacts for a long time in our day-to-day. So, and that's probably not even sort of the most sophisticated of the technology, but we already see it happening. An innocuous case happened this weekend with Princess Kate's picture for Mother's Day. I'm not sure how important that is. I'm an American, so the royals are, sort of something that happens across the pond. But even that, she put out a note or a picture to alleviate people's feelings of what's maybe happening with her after a medical situation. And it came out, I think that AP or Reuters sort of analyzed the image, or maybe both, analyzed the image and saw some uncertain pieces, and as a result called to it, and it's been pulled. But what does that do? It causes mistrust. It causes people to think, really, what's going on if they're putting out these images in the public? So on a day-to-day, we're already seeing these examples, maybe some more important, some, I don't know if they're important or not, happening. But they erode on a daily basis. And as Paul said, the routine, this erosion is like a drop of water hitting people on a daily basis, to the point where trust is really being impacted. And people don't know who can they trust anymore. What can they trust?
Paul, I sense that you want to jump in. I also have something to add around this conversation around the Kate images, but I'll let you jump in.
I will push back a little bit. It's so easy to blame the decline of trust on technology. Technology does have a role in it. But let's not kid ourselves. The decline of trust in media, we did this to ourselves, right? As a person of color, I do not often see my voice, my community's voice in media, right? By ignoring these different communities, we got to where we got to today so that technology and bad actors could use it to further erode the trust. So let's not just, technology has a role, but let's not escape. We are not perfect. We had a big role on how the distrust happened because we never really care about all of these marginalized communities and all these different communities that was never part of the mainstream coverage.
I'd also add, I mean, and I have not been following that story closely enough. I've been here enjoying the conference, but is that, you know, I feel, for one, that we maybe have not done a great job in the media of explaining what's happening in that photo, right? What is it that is controversial? What is it about it that is deceiving? What is it that caused us to, you know, what is it, the kill order?
Which doesn't happen very much at the AP. Like,
right,
that's actually a really big deal.
And exactly, and seems very dramatic, and I think engages people in a story that's fascinating, but without doing enough maybe to explain what the danger is and what the fear and what, you know, other than just saying this image has been altered and we are a journalism institution and so that is against our rules, right? So Vera, I'd love to hear from you, but I'd also love to hear a little bit from everyone on the panel about what we can do to sort of counter that, because I do believe that there's an education gap, there's a transparency gap that needs to be filled if we're ever going to, you know, do anything about the lack of trust. But Vera, go ahead.
Yeah, agree. I think this would be the perfect opportunity now to explain and be transparent about journalistic principles, because I think the big public doesn't understand, or people don't typically understand the principles of journalism, and I think journalistic, like people in journalism, they expect people to understand and know. They take it for granted, even though they don't take the time to explain and really like go through it. So I think they need to start doing that all the time, explaining their principles, their values, why they're doing what they're doing, what is the kind of the reason why they choose to write a story about something and maybe leave something out. And I think these kind of examples are the perfect timings and perfect places to do so, because now everybody is interested in that what happened. So now AP should explain that. Then to kind of, so that's part of it. So being transparent about your processes is key, but also like the traditionally, like two other things are important for creating trust. So it's transparency, it's expertise. I trust you if I think that you know what you're doing. So expertise is another thing, and media needs to show that they have expertise to gain that trust. And then the third thing that they need to do is exactly what you are talking about. Media needs to show that they value people and that they are on your side as an audience member, also for minorities. So that's the third kind of pillar of trust is about kind of relating to, so that I trust you if I think that you care about me and my values and feelings. So that's something that media has to do. So it's about engagement and engaging people and talking to them.
Paul, I think you might have some experience in this realm and have maybe seen some of the things to that end that have worked and that haven't. Could you talk a little bit about sort of ways that those bridges have been attempted to be built, ways that they have actually been built, things that we've seen just totally miss the mark?
Yeah, I think when we think about audience engagement, and we tend to look at dashboards, and there was like a whole era in journalism where it's just like, what are the numbers? Everyone has some dashboard. Oh, there's a lot of click. Let's create more of that, right? That's actually like a really terrible way of like developing relationship with the audience. And you're basically getting some fractional data, and then you're producing more garbage in some sense, right? Like you don't know whether people really want it or not. I think the things that really work, again, it really goes back to how are you inviting your communities to co-create this journalism for you, right? If the journalism is to inform and empower the community to do something with that information, again, what does that feedback loop look like? And how are you engaging the different constituent in different ways, right? Like even though journalism had really innovated in our distribution, we have not really asked some fundamental questions. When you think about education coverage, when you think about police coverage, when you think about government coverage, they has not changed. The public has no role the students have no role in shaping your education coverage. So what could you do differently today to basically say, if I was an education reporter, what is it that I would do to understand what is the student needs from me as an education reporter? What does the PTA need from me as an education reporter? What does the education system need from me as a reporter? Because I would say most of the reporting tend to tilt toward power and institution and not sort of what the people need to be informed and do something with it.
Well, that's audience-centric thinking, right? Is to really think about what your audience needs and wants and the information, the questions that you ask. I mean, you think about the things that people are searching for, and then you go toward that as opposed to trying to recreate a viral hit, which I can tell you for sure never works. But, well, sorry. And Mickey, tell me a little bit about, you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting just in terms of this, you know, the trust in AI and the sort of skepticism that people have is that they both like are excited by AI and its potential in media, and they're also terrified of it, right? It's gonna make my job easier, but I'm also scared. And I'm afraid of misinformation, but also I can spot a deep fake, right? So how do we reckon in media with that sort of tension, right? And apply that to the way, to Paul's point, we think about what the audience actually needs in order to engage them in that conversation.
We have started asking respondents to our surveys about AI, how they feel about AI in general. And we are finding that pretty consistently there's that dichotomy, that people are really excited, really want to see what this technology can do for them, but they're really scared, and they're really scared that it's moving too fast. So those two things are living at the same time. I saw an interesting stat this morning of a survey we ran in Indonesia, or in APAC in general. In Indonesia, we found that about 50% of people are very excited in AI. But who are those people? They're men. They tend to be men, younger, more highly educated with higher incomes. So there are certain groups that are more excited than other groups. It also depends on what AI is going to impact. It can be inspirational at work. It can help your work, but people are nervous about, will it take my work away? So there's this dichotomy oftentimes with this technology that we're finding in the surveys that we're running that I actually find really, really interesting. I also, we did a little work on politics and AI. And overall, what we hear from consumers is that they're interested in or want to see more transparency and authenticity, et cetera. And in a political debate, they see potentially as AI being able to contribute to fact-checking, because more and more of our politicians maybe are a little sort of soft on the truth. I'm being very, very politically correct
yeah,
today.
that was very diplomatic.
So if you know me, you know that that's not exactly the way I roll usually, but you know, using AI to guide that sort of real-time fact-checking is something that consumers are interested in having access to, because they don't know when they're watching the debates or when they're hearing from candidates, are they telling me the truth, or are they just trying to get me on their side?
So fact-checking seems like a great use of AI, and maybe something that we'd want to empower the audiences to have. I mean, I'm interested from the understanding what the community needs and wants, Paul, and leaning into that, and how we can engage the audience in the journalism and content that the media produces. Like, what role does AI have in that conversation as a tool for newsrooms, or does it?
Yeah, I see actually there's a lot of opportunities in terms of AI and engaging the audience, right? So, for example, when you think about a lot of the health coverage, right, it tends to exclude different data sets from different marginalized community, right? But AI now at its state, you could actually build different kind of models within different communities. So how do we as journalists actually empower these community to build their own models and integrate that information as an information gap into the community's information gap? So to me, that's an opportunity. But I do think, like, I don't know if it's American or Western, we have this obsession of like right versus wrong, and I do think right now the conversation is somewhere in between, right? Like, it's either good for you or bad for you. I love it or I'm scared. You don't know until you actually do something with it, right? So for example, if Erica, you decide to have a podcast today, right? With synthetic voice, you could produce a whole podcast with using Erica's voice without her actually speaking, right? So, for example, like she have a podcast, she doesn't feel well, and she say, I'm gonna use my synthetic voice that she will sanction. Is that okay? Is that not okay? In the newsroom, we would spend eons from some high-level editor debating about like whether that's okay or not, versus why don't you just do it? Tell the audience like, hey, I'm Erica, I don't feel well today, so this podcast is using my synthetic voice, and see what the market response will look like. If no one have a problem with it, then it pretty much tell you the audience think it's okay. But if they do have a problem, trust me, the consumer will tell you that they have a problem. But in media, we operate from this ivory tower thinking that we have to answer all the questions without even involving the community. And that's what I mean by like engage them. They have a role in terms of not just the feedback loop, but I think your community also play an important role in terms of co-creating what that product could look like with technology.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I really do think that we tend to make a lot of assumptions about our audiences without asking them, testing them, saying what we're doing. How can we bring that out into, outside of this panel and us making these fabulous suggestions and having this great conversation that we're having today? What are the things that you think that you would like to see, or the ways that you can see that change? I mean, Vera, I know that Saidot has sort of created this pretty amazing database to try to encourage not just media, but all manner of organizations to understand AI and the risks, but then also some of the, mitigating factors that they can implement to sort of avoid some of those risks. So could you talk a little bit about sort of what role, I think education, but then also like, does AI have a role in helping us rebuild the trust lost by AI?
Yeah, we have, for example, when it comes to AI risks, we have more than 100 AI risks identified, and also mitigation methods for those 100 plus AI risks. And so I don't think we shouldn't do AI. I think we should take advantage of all the good things that AI brings, but we just have to be very conscious about how to do it right, and assess the risks in the context where we are using AI. So it's not that the same risk would be always the same. It so much depends on the context. So, for example, if we talk about hallucination, I think probably all of you or most of you are familiar with the concept that these foundation models are just coming up with nonsense if there are not enough facts in the training data that they're using, and so this example of hallucination actually might be excellent in the context of using AI to get new ideas for creative use. For example, you wanted to hallucinate because you wanted to give you new options that were not created before for product design, new features or whatever. So it's actually a great thing that it's hallucinating. That's what you wanted to do. But then on the other hand, a hallucination in another context, for example, if you're using it as a diagnostics tool in doctor kind of in healthcare, and it's inventing something. It's of course a totally different thing. So it might have life-threatening impact if we let it, if we don't control the hallucinations there. So I think overall. So the context is the king, and I think taking this now to the journalism context. So I think also in journalism there is we can do a lot with AI. I don't think that you should stop innovating about how to use AI just because of these risks involved. I think you just need to do it consciously and really analyze the kind of the risks involved and how you can then take them down with mitigating factors, including, for example, filtering for undesired outcomes that you don't, for example, if you have a chatbot that you don't that you filter out responses that you don't want to have in, just like we've done in moderation for a long time already. Just apply it in that new context. For example, that's just one example, but there are many, and you just always need to think about the context, that what works in this context.
Can I add also, and to go back to a point that Paul made a little while ago, about education and not making these decisions. I think this is really great, but not making these decisions without the consumers, without educating and being transparent and letting the consumers know that this is going on. Because often I think, going back to trust, you lose trust if you implement these things without being transparent, and then things that you don't envision happen. And you end up, shooting yourself in the foot, basically. So that transparency in the education piece, I think there are a lot of great applications, but bringing the consumers along with the process is important.
Yeah, you're totally right. So transparency is the key. So you have to always tell the users that they are interacting, for example, with AI and not with a real person. That's really crucial. And I think overall the kind of, you actually asked, and I forgot to talk about that, but AI literacy is a key thing. So I think there will be there has been a discussion about digital divide. You remember maybe that concept? I think the new concept will be AI literacy divide. So there will be people that will be kind of knowledgeable about how AI is affecting the world and what are the risks, and also they are better at recognizing the problematic areas and risks and so on. Then there are other people who will not be on board, and I'm really a bit concerned about what will happen when we have a lot of people who are not on board with the risks and who will then be easy to affect with all this deepfakes and so on. And I'm not so concerned about trustworthy organizations doing it. I'm a bit more concerned about criminals who will not even comply to any regulations or any rules, just who want to, and also there are also countries in this world who don't respect any rules like that, who are happy to manipulate people, and that's what I'm concerned about.
Like in some country, the institution and criminal is a very thin line.
Well, that's very true. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. What role does policy have in this conversation, right? I think that there are, Europe, for example, is leaning into policy, legislation, regulation around AI, in service of making sure that our internet stays trustworthy to some degree, and that audiences have that that level of knowledge and confidence in what they're seeing online. Good, bad? What are others going to follow suit? What do we think the role of policy in this trust and audiences conversation is?
I will let the Europeans speak first.
Yeah, we had a previous discussion about this topic already, and I said that I really welcome AI regulation. not every regulation is good, and I do agree with also the views of some saying that regulation might hinder also in some cases innovation. But I think for AI we do need regulation because that's the only way we know as humans how to control what we are doing and have like rules that everybody is applying. And so that's the best practice of laws are the best practice we know for getting us all follow the same rules. So that's good. And I think the AI regulation coming in Europe in effect, I think it will come in effect very soon. So they are supposed to have the final voting very soon, and there is a political agreement already. So it is 99% sure to go through soon. And we will have an AI Act in Europe, and I think the AI Act is actually a well-thought piece because it doesn't regulate technology. Actually, it regulates risky usage of technology. So it all starts with what kind of use cases for AI are risky, so that we want to make sure that we don't make big mistakes there. And then for the rest, it's just proposing transparency that you're talking that you're using AI. And I think that's actually not a tall order. I think it's good that we know when we're talking to, for example, to AI. And I think it's good that we regulate, for example, AI being used in healthcare or regulate AI in using when we are like giving people social security benefits, that it's not that we don't let AI decide who gets them and who doesn't without having proper human supervision, for example. So AI Act, the main principle is kind of around regulating risky usage of AI, and I think that's something that we really need.
As a minority in America, my parents from China, rules and regulation in China around AI, is it good, is it bad? You guys could read the news, right? Like, I don't want to jaywalk and suddenly somehow AI tell me I get 3-point deducted, therefore I can't travel. Like, you know, like to what end would these rules and regulation come to be? And when I think about some of the biggest mistakes that we see in the world, these mistakes end up becoming the biggest opportunities that we see. So I don't think there is a one regulation that will do it justice. What I could imagine is sort of each group figure out what is the thing to regulate in relation to technology, right? So when you think about FDA, NHTSA, the FAA, they have very rigorous ways of thinking about, you know, how do you regulate autonomous vehicles? How do you regulate medicine, right? Like, to say that you cannot use AI in healthcare, to me, I'm just like, if it wasn't for AI, are we going to have the COVID vaccine as fast? Maybe, maybe not. So I just think the regulation has to be, you know, each sector needs to think of what that regulation look like for themselves and not like a master plan of, you know, sort of like come down. Right?
Yeah, but that's how the AI Act actually works, so that it's just having these general principles, and then it's the kind of the specific, so for example, it is being combined with medical device regulation, so it's the kind of experts in medical device regulation that will now take AI kind of principles, AI Act principles into medical device regulation. So it is exactly what you're saying, that it's industry specific.
I mean, I don't disagree. Yeah. Some regulation could be healthy, but I just don't believe that
in general
a general regulation will solve the problem. I mean, consider, do you trust the people in regulatory body that do they even understand technology to come up with policy that makes sense?
Well, and do you trust that whomever is in power in the moment, you know, sort of building the regulation? I think that we have good examples in the US, especially around social media, which I believe is not regulated at all. And maybe some are even thinking that's a big mistake after some of the things that's happening. So it's not just verticals or topical areas, but it's maybe regulation to certain parts of the population, like kids, for example. So I agree that a blanket, I get a little bit uncomfortable in conversations around regulation. But a blanket regulation I think is very problematic, but maybe understanding sort of where regulation makes sense is the approach.
Yeah, and I think there are like, I must admit that there are different kinds of regulations and not all of them are good. So also we've been kind of tracking more than 70 different regulations related to AI. So there are a lot of these things happening all over the world and they are very different. And for example, the Chinese AI regulation is not protecting people, it's protecting the Chinese government. So it's making sure that they have control also in the age of AI over the people. So that's of course a totally different motivation for building the regulation than, for example, the European one, which is starting from the rights of the consumers and the people and protecting them. So yeah, so big differences there.
Okay, and I did not mean to frame it as a binary, is it good or is it bad, right? As Paul said, I think there is, the conversation needs to happen somewhere in the middle. Okay, let's do a quick rapid fire. Number one most important thing that you think will help us to foster trust between media and today's audiences, and then we're going to turn to our audience to get some questions. I'll start with you, Paul.
Actually, just go and meet the audience in real life, right? Whether it's through Zoom, like you need to, relationship is built on connections, and you can't do that through numbers and digital interaction. So I do think like just go out and like get to know the people.
Vera?
I would say transparency. So be very, very open about your motives and how you work and how you use AI in your work, and just explain so that you're very open.
Well, Vera took mine. So I was going to say transparency, so it's hard to go last. But I do think transparency is key. Even when an organization makes a mistake, being transparent with that mistake and the impact of that mistake is better than not being transparent at all. Can we do one more thing before we break?
Yeah.
Show of hands. We also asked consumers how many of them believe they could tell if an image was AI generated. If you saw an image, could you tell that it was AI generated? Raise your hand if you feel, and then I'll tell you what consumers said in general. Raise your hand if you feel that you could. Okay, Evan thinks. Evan is the, okay, we have a couple of sort of shy people saying maybe, okay. Our consumers in our study said 30% of them believe that they could tell an AI generated image, which I felt was high. Unless you show me a picture of Jennifer Aniston and tell her it's me, I would probably believe that. But I thought that was high, but there are some people out there who really do believe that they can tell when AI is being put in front of them.
Erica, so I keep hearing transparency. As a journalist, I do love it, but it also annoys the shit out of me. Because transparency is so inactionable. Is again, someone from the ivory tower just like telling you. So I would do a modification is, it has to be actionable transparency. By you being transparent to the audience, what is it that they could take action on? If they can't take action, it's no different than your parents is like, no, you cannot go out and play. Why, Mom? Because I said so. She's transparent, not actionable, and at the end you just get really angry, right?
Yeah, but so if she doesn't tell you why, then she's not being transparent. So I think the why is the thing. So transparency is often about why.
Yeah, but after you tell me the why, I have to be able to say, have the opportunity to say, no, Mom, you're wrong, right?
The feedback loop. Let's start our feedback loop. There is a microphone in the back. If anyone has a question for our panel, please step up and go ahead and ask it.
Hey, thank you so much for your talk. So I have a podcast, and it just hit top 10% most downloaded in the world. And while I'm super grateful for that, it's been a huge surprise to me because I don't know who my audience is. You talk about engagement and creating a community with your listeners. How can I do that, like building trust and creating community with them when I don't know who they are?
That's a great question. Oftentimes, well, there are a number of ways that you can do that. With a database like ours, you could find respondents who are interested in whichever focus your podcast is in. And they may not be your listeners, but they may be people like your listeners. And you can delve into who they are, what excites them, why they love going to podcasts, for example. So that's one way. Another way is to try to find out who those podcasts are, or the podcast listeners are, and to try to engage them. You could, on your podcast, say that you are interested in getting feedback directly from your listeners, and if they would write back to a certain email address or go to a website and share their feedback, that could be another way.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that, I think that sometimes, to the same point about like asking them what they want, ask them. I think there are ways to gather that information through surveys and things like that. I also think that, some of the things that I know that we look at is like where people are coming to us from, that may not tell you exactly who they are, but it can tell you something about like, how they found you, why they're engaging with you. So I think that while we have said that data can be, faceless and impersonal, and that we cannot create for a monolith, I do think that there are ways that you can use data to try to at least get first cuts at understanding who your audience is. But then in order to personalize that further, you do have to, I think, engage the community.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you. It's called I Don't Know Anything with Paige Harriman, by the way. Just that should
Good
share.
promo.
Thank you.
I was just like, after survey, you could host a conference call to your listeners. You could actually do a Clubhouse event with your listeners, and just understand that whoever joined in is self-selected, so it's just a representation of a part of your audience.
Hi. Some of you expressed some hesitation around regulation. Could you talk a little bit more about why and what do you think is a better alternative to regulation, given everything that's been going on in the last few years and the current state of the world?
So for me, I would speak personally, is I prefer education over regulations, right? So I have to be informed enough to know what are the choices that I need to make. So for example, as I'm thinking about expanding my family, I don't feel like, even though I'm an educated person, I don't feel like I'm informed to understand what is the risk of me posting picture of my kid in social media versus the reward. Like, I sort of understand the reward, right? I share my life with my friends, people, but I don't understand the risk. So part of this is how do we educate consumers so that they actually make that decision themselves, right? Whether they should use it or not use it. And my hesitation with regulation is it basically bifurcate to like a good bucket or possible bad bucket, when I feel like a lot of technology use is very gray.
So given that you don't feel educated on making a sort of simple decision as to whether you share photos of your child or not, right? How do you expect people to be able to be educated around all the details and complexities around how LLMs are trained, how multiple, these very complex models are trained and used by companies without transparency and without any necessary regulation?
I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, but it has to be in a way that help the public make an informed decision, rather than making the decision for the public.
I would agree with that. I think regulation without education, that sounds like a little slogan of some sort, but regulation without education is just, here's a rule, I'm not going to sort of explain to you why, to go back to Vera's, which is important too, to understand what the implications are of certain actions. And I think I'm a little bit hesitant on regulation because I fear that it can tamp down innovation sometimes if it goes too far. And I don't know where that line is, but I do believe that there are There are places where regulation makes a lot of sense. I think it's a complicated conversation.
Also, regulations can be wrong. Again, as a minority person, how many regulation in America is designed against me? From the 1800s, if I came here to build a railroad, the Chinese Exclusion Act would basically tell me that I'm ineligible to be a citizen, even if I was born here, right? That is a form of regulation. So my hesitation is regulation could be wrong. I'm not saying regulations are bad, but you need to build it in a way that the regulation could evolve based on input and education.
Audience participation.
Yeah, I just feel that you guys don't understand the kind of the regulation that is good regulation, because I think the kind of the good regulation that we need for the AI is not regulating consumers for once. So it's not about regulating what you can do or not do. It's regulating big organizations. And it's not regulating no-risk cases. It's concentrating on in the places where actually human rights, like minority rights, that are threatened because of biases in the data, in the training data. I think that's also so it's exactly why actually regulation is needed, so that we make sure that the biases in the training data don't sacrifice human rights, for example. And there are so many other cases as well where it's critical that we get it right with AI, and in those cases we need regulation. So I think always remember the context we're talking about, and in AI, context is the king. And context for the regulation is the context where there are risks, and those we should definitely regulate, and not the others. And I think regulation, good regulation, actually helps us to bring that kind of innovations forward that we need for the society and for ourselves, and and I think the other kind of innovations are not needed. We don't want to have innovations that trash human rights, security, or health. So I'm welcoming that we don't have that much innovation in those fronts. And I think the kind of requirements of the regulation are actually just quality control things that you should have as part of your normal innovation as well, that you can innovate and research freely, but before you take it to production, you start having quality control of what you're doing. And that's normal, and I think we are just with AI. We are so amazed with the AI and these large language models that we forgot about normal quality control. And I think for that we need the regulation to make sure that the quality control is there when there are important things we're doing with AI.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for coming to hear this talk.
Thank you very much. I want to, again, thank our panelists, especially AI Jennifer Aniston. It's what we call a callback in comedy. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for great moderation. I want to thank our sponsors again, Amagi, who is revolutionizing video playback, and VideoAmp, who is revolutionizing the way we measure the video that we watch. We've got a great panel coming up at 4 o'clock with some great panelists. I will be moderating. We will be talking about how to use data to actually improve the world and make media better. Thank you all for coming. Come back at 4. See you soon. Thanks so much.